it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. It's been a while, hasn't it? Yes, 12 long days since we last sat down and podded. And it's been quite an eventful break. I wrote this a few days ago. With a huge international break injury, and the FA Cup games having concluded over this weekend as we come to you. And then another thing happens, which we'll discuss in just a minute. And frankly, I come back a bit frazzled, Sam, now having spent all of this Mother's Day trying to ensure I didn't have my nose in my phone and instead focused on my partner and my family. I tried as well as I could, but I'm sure if she's just in this room, I'm sure she'd be shooting me a knowing look. Happy Mother's Day to all the mums out there. And yeah, since my, it's basically just been one a hell of a lot to catch up on over the last kind of 15, 20, half an hour, however long I had to swat up everything, as I frankly tuned out of FPL during international break, as you probably all should have. Phew. Right. Well, anyway, to help me and to help all of you make sense of all of this, as always, I'm joined by Sam, who I hope is much more switched on than I have been. How are you, mate? You're all right?
Hey, mate. Yeah, all good, thank you. Obviously, the break was quite nice because we didn't really have much FPL to even think about during the international break, just monitoring those players and making sure they didn't go down injured, which of course a few did. In the break, I also turned 30, so I'm starting to feel like an older man now. Hopefully with that brings a little bit more wisdom. My rank
You're so wise already. You're so wise already, Sam. You didn't
well, it's not reflected in my rank at the moment, so fingers crossed that it goes a little bit uphill from here. But yeah, all very good, very relaxed after the international break. And then we were brought back down to earth over the FA Cup weekend. Tons going on and quite a few implications on chip strategy. A few wildcards might be going active in the community tonight, possibly even on this pod as well. And to make sense of it all, we're going to go through it together and hopefully come to some sort of conclusion by the end of this pod, this stream. So in the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist on today's pods. And this again was written a few days ago, so this will probably be tweaked a little bit. But team updates from what seems like a decade ago in Game Week 29. Quick review of how we did there. Then speedily on to a calendar update, what the FA Cup has meant for the fixtures moving forwards, including basically not confirmed, but almost confirmed double game weeks and blank game weeks to come. We'll have a look at the knee jerk, which we initially had given to Chris Wood, but I think a certain other striker might be dominating the knee jerk now this week after the injury today. And of course, all as part of that, we'll be looking at wildcarding and whether or not that is now going to be a pretty important and sensible strategy to be implementing in Game Week 30. So we'll be discussing the pros and cons of that. And as always, best transfers, bold claims, best captains, probably a little bit more obvious now, sadly, after the news today. And then also, of course, finishing off with our teams, which may or may not need a chip this week. In the meantime, though, it's Sunday, the 30th of March. The clocks have gone forwards, which is always great fun in the UK. FA Cup quarterfinals are done and dusted. Should we have a quick look, though, back at Game Week 29, Tom?
Yeah. I've got no idea what the FA Cup happened before this international break. I don't remember it whatsoever. 57 is what I got, but I think you just shaded me this week, didn't you?
I did, but I can't actually remember this for sure, but I'm pretty sure I took a hit. So I think 55 net for me, and you might have beaten me by 2 points there. But I'll go first since mine's on screen first. 59 points, a decent enough week, a little green arrow of about 40k, I think. I was hoping for a little bit better, but considering I wasn't free hitting, I will take a green arrow. So that's absolutely fine. Bruno Fernandes getting the 17-pointer was the highlight with that last game of the week, which, of course, was very happily received by me, who otherwise would have been on yet another red or possibly greyish arrow going into Game Week 30. Elsewhere, Robinson and Gabriel, who weren't popular on free hit drafts, both did okay for me, 5 and 7 points respectively there. The Bournemouth boys were disappointing, 2 and 1 for Cliver and Semenyo. Up top, I had Haaland bagging me 1 goal It came fairly early, if I remember rightly. So I was hopeful that he might get a bit of a haul there. It didn't happen. But 59 points was all right. Pretty much the Bruno Fernandes show for me. Not really much more to say than that. How about you?
Yeah, fair enough. And 57 for me. And yeah, just come back to me a little bit now. Most of the same points as you. I had Kirkes. I had Marmoush with a goal and a penalty assist. But yes, I think my memory was that I had, if you remember, I had the choice between Hudson-Odoi, Bellegarde, and Elanga. Elanga got 14, was it? Fixed, maybe 16?
Yeah, something around that. 2 goals.
Yeah, one I chose bloody Hudson-Odoi. Got me 3 points. Yeah, cheers, Cal. Bloody hell, what a pain in the ass that was. So yeah, that was a bit. I remember being a bit annoyed about that actually. Next day or so. Obviously, Marmoush's goal and assist was very well received, and I did bring in Haaland as well. Yeah, it was very much sort of the case that the Bruno show at the end was not as well received by me because I was on like a green arrow by like 10 points or something like that, and then that slowly got whittled down throughout that evening. I didn't watch the game, so I didn't have anyone in it, and I was just like, I don't want to watch it in case Bruno doesn't. Yeah, luckily he stopped where he did, and I got escaped with a green arrow by like 2 points, I think, or something like that. But yeah, kind of just hovering around the 250, 260k mark at the moment. So yeah, frustrating. And I mean, who knows? I think maybe it might be time to wildcard this team, which was looking fine for 30. But yeah, a few things have happened. But before we go into that, hot off the press, we've just had the FA Cup weekend done. The quarterfinals have all finished. All the away teams won. So
yeah,
beat Fulham. Friends of the pod, James and Panico, were both at that game. One was supporting Fulham, sorry James, and Panico very happy that Palace did the business. Brighton lost on penalties narrowly to Forest. Man City just about squeaked past Bournemouth, and then Aston Villa comfortably beat Preston North End, plucky Preston. So yeah, well, I've got no idea, Sam. What does this mean for everybody? Please enlighten me and the listeners and viewers.
Right. Well, I've very hastily made a very quick graphic, so apologies if there are any very small errors on here. Hopefully there aren't. But it will all circle around 5 teams primarily. Now, obviously, the teams that have just progressed in the FA Cup will have a semi-final to play. That will get played during game week 34. And that means in most cases that they won't be able to play their match in game week 34 and therefore will have to get moved. Most also look pretty likely to go to game week 33, then unconfirmed at the moment. So this is just kind of guesswork, I suppose, would be a loose term for it. But I think given the amount of people in the community who are well versed on this are confident that most of them will go to game week 33, I think that's relatively safe-ish to assume that most of them will. So the one fixture that won't get moved or looks unlikely to get moved is the Nottingham Forest fixture, because their matches either side of game week 34, 33 and 35 are both scheduled in for the Monday evening games. And that makes it difficult for them to move the fixture from game week 34 to either of those 2 game weeks. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. And therefore, their fixture is actually probably going to get pushed to the midweek of game week 34. So it doesn't make much difference for Nottingham Forest. I think they're against Brentford. For the other teams, there will be doubles and blanks. So Crystal Palace is probably the most interesting of the bunch. They've got game week 30 ahead against Southampton, so it's a good jumping on point now, followed by game week 31 against Brighton. Then back-to-back double game weeks looks very likely now. So we already know that double game week 32 is confirmed for both Crystal Palace and Newcastle. Now Crystal Palace also look likely to have a double game week in 33. Interestingly, for any assistant manager chip users out there, they will have table bonus in a number of those fixtures in game week 32 and 33. So that could be very interesting for those of you who still have the assistant manager chip to play. But it's still great for a triple up. As we know, Palace are in great form right now, and therefore will also blank in game week 34. Newcastle, also interesting. Not anything has changed this weekend, but a reminder that they double in game week 32 and then play in game week 34 against Ipswich. So there might be a strategy play there. The other three teams that are interesting now are Arsenal, who, because Crystal Palace have made it through to the semi-final, they look likely to have their fixture moved to game week 33 because it is against Palace. So they could have a double of Ipswich away from home and Crystal Palace at home in game week 33, blanking in game week 34. Aston Villa look likely, again, very likely, in fact, to have a double game week of Newcastle and Man City in game week 33, blank in game week 34, and Man City being the final team looking most likely to double in game week 33, having Everton and Villa away for Everton and then home against Villa. And again, blank game week 34. So none of those are confirmed yet, other than the double game week 32 fixtures. But given what we know now, they look relatively likely. And what we do know as well is that they'd have to get moved somewhere. So those teams will have a double game week. It looks likely it'll be game week 33, but it could be another week potentially.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So at least we know the identities of the teams who are going to double. And I suppose that really helps, especially the Palace double, if that does happen, or knowing that Palace do have those games upcoming. It kind of really helps to, I guess, focus the mind a little bit. It's obviously the big kind of the kind of the elephant in the room really is if you have incurred a lot of injuries. So a couple of people kind of mentioned, Jamie said on Blue Sky that he only won free transfer, wasn't planning to wildcard, owns Trent, Haaland and Wood, hasn't even made a draft, but it can't help feeling that, it could wildcard, could take a -4. And Dan, FL Gas, friend of the pod, has said that he's already hit the button, Sam. And I know there's a few people across our group chats and other friends of the pod who are thinking the same. And I don't know. I feel like everything's sort of been really pushed up, I suppose, a little bit in terms of the planning. We knew that we wouldn't know everything for sure, but at least we do have these kind of teams that we know do have those doubles coming at some point. And what's quite useful as well is that we also know that in the immediate term, a couple of these teams do either have good fixtures. So in the case of Palace, there's an immediate sort of a carrot on the table in terms of Hampton away game. For City, that we know there's double coming, and they've also got Leicester straight away, and they've got a really good run in. And Arsenal having a double game week coming up as well is also very, very handy, especially with that man Bukayo Saka back in training. I think that could be a really interesting thing to kind of focus in on. And so there's so much that you could possibly do here. There's so many things you could think about. You could be waiting for information. You could just think, you know what, screw it. And it's quite difficult to decide which way to go, especially because we've got quite a pressurized sort of mini situation now, don't we, with the deadline on April Fool's Day at 6:15. So we haven't got long at all to make this decision. And it's quite a abrupt, rude awakening from the international snooze fest, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like we've got a long time to be able to calibrate and realign our strategies, because I think a lot of us were thinking this one's kind of a bye week. Like, we'll just roll out what we can and we'll move into game week 31, where we might get some official announcements on Friday, because a lot of the official announcements have come on Fridays so far for fixture moves. So we're thinking that by game week 31, we would have the info and be able to wildcard with a bit more certainty. Whereas now, I think given some of the injuries that have come in, and we'll discuss Wood, we'll discuss Haaland in a moment's time, as well as a few others, of course, and the fixtures on the table for the correct teams that also have doubles later on down the line, it feels like this week is an opportunity more so than it would have been prior to the FA Cup results, when we didn't know with as much certainty that Crystal Palace could have 2 double game weeks, or Arsenal or Man City, for instance, weren't guaranteed a double game week at that point. So having that information now, and the fact that, like you said, Palace have Southampton, Newcastle have Brentford, Man City have Leicester, some great fixtures to take advantage of right now. And I made a video earlier this week where basically the crux of it was, if you wildcard a week early, yeah, you're doing it without the information, but you've got 11.1% of the season that you're optimizing for, that people who wildcard next week aren't going to be optimized for. So yeah, I'm very, very close to hitting the button now. I might do it on the stream because I can't see a world in which my team currently, even though I don't have that many injuries, I can't see a world where the team that you move towards now, knowing that these teams will have double game weeks in the future, doesn't beat my current lineup. And I think a lot of people are relating to that now. So even with less information, even with a pretty quick turnaround, I can see a lot of buttons getting pushed.
A lot of it comes down to like confidence margin, doesn't it? And the idea that, there's a concept in professional circles, I guess, when you're thinking about starting a project or starting a new product, that you need to get to a certain confidence level before you hit the go button. And it feels like, yes, okay, we don't have the fixtures like from on high written down, but we do know the teams, as you kind of spoke about. We've got enough kind of bits of information to possibly put into the bucket to fill if you're putting in information, it becomes water and it kind of goes up towards a level of kind of confidence, right? Where you're like, okay, it's full enough, like a pint line or something. And it kind of feels like I'm pretty much there as well. That even if the doubles don't go off in 33, in fact, that, to be honest, if the doubles don't go in, if the double doesn't go into 32 and it goes into a bit later, given the fact that between 32 and 33, you've got probably going to triple Newcastle that you have to kind of deal with, that actually works a bit better, oddly, if it doesn't actually happen that way, strangely enough. And but you've still got your Crystal Palace kind of players in place for that later on. You're probably still going to have your Arsenal players in place. Whether what the hell you do with Aston Villa is probably a different question, but they do have the nice carrot of the 32 single against Southampton away, and then City have got a great run in anyway. If you've got your free hit in your pocket, that kind of deals with 34 nicely, so you don't have to kind of worry about that. And yeah, I don't know, it kind of feels like it's the time almost. I feel like I've hit that confidence level too. Yeah, it's so like, it's so situational, I guess, for a lot of people. And full disclosure for us two filthy casuals, Sam, we may have already made transfers, so we may both be on 0 transfers, and I'm looking at hits for Wood out and yes, Haaland out. So saving those hits as well as kind of optimizing for the 11% of the season which is left. In our situation, that probably does look a bit better, but in others, say you've got 2, 3, 4 transfers kind of left, so you can mop up the mess now. I'd be kind of thinking, you know what? If you can ride out 31, assuming you're not playing your assistant manager with 31, which we'll come on to in a minute, then I think that you're probably going to be all right, actually. So wildcard in 31, 32, maybe even. So you've got max information on someone like Saka, for example. So there's lots of different ways you can possibly play this now. In our situation, I mean, I've got similar sort of issues to you. You've got Woods, Haaland, Trent, Dango. Dango's obviously not injured, but one of those kind of players that you're kind of like, probably move him on. He's dropping as well tonight. Not that it matters at all with Haaland being injured, but there's just, it definitely does feel like I'm also sharing your world view, that I don't see a world. This is so famous last words. I don't see a world where my team, as it is, limping into 30 with a hit, which is what I'd need to field 11, I think. I don't see a world where wildcard doesn't help me, as well as kind of saving on -4, -8 worth of hits. It's just whether I can kind of make it work between 32 and 33. But that means I can roll 1, 2, 3 enough transfers, I think, to make it all kind of fit together. So this was like not the option that I'd expected to have occurred, as with the assistant manager playing that in 24. But sometimes you've got to react to what's in front of you, haven't you?
Yeah, you do. And I honestly, I'm a little bit gutted. I'm just a little bit annoyed, and I was saying this off stream to you beforehand, that it seems now such an obvious strategy to a lot of managers, because I made my transfer really early and I kept it fairly quiet because I was a bit embarrassed. But I made that transfer early on Munoz, thinking, you know what? I definitely want him. And then if anything goes wrong, I'm going to go a week early on a wild card. And that's going to be me being differential. And I'm going to be a bit against the grain. And again, I was saying to you earlier this week, I'm probably going to try going without a Haaland or something and see what I can max out on elsewhere. Because again, that will be fairly differential. I'm chasing rank. I'm 380k. I've got to make up some ground somehow. So maybe taking 7 million out on my forward line and putting it across my midfield or something like that could have been a nice little upgrade to have. And now I'm not going to have either of those advantages. And even in like the 2 hours since the FA Cup results have finished, I've seen like 20 wildcard drafts online, and they all look disturbingly similar to the one that I was trying to put together. So I am wondering where the edge is going to come in now. And I'm just hoping that enough people have already used certain chips and are already tied into a strategy where I can still gain the ground on taking this pretty well trodden path, it seems now. But yeah, I mean, information is key, like we always say on this pod, but I think we're pretty much there on the information, barring like exactly where those fixtures go. It seems like the confidence interval is fairly high, and given our situations where hits need to be taken, and let's face it, there are points on the board this week. There are points to go and attack against Southampton. You've got a flying Crystal Palace side who are really good away from home as well, who were able to take off Mateta early in the midweek, and we've seen him start twice now since his injury, once in a friendly. You've got Newcastle coming back in against Brentford, then Leicester, and then you've got Man City up against Leicester. Given that Marmoush seems almost a lock to start, there's just so many things going for it this week, and maybe there's one or two edge pieces you can have some fun on, but a wild card's always more tempting when you know the best players to buy on the wild card, and I think 9 out of the 11 starters for most people are pretty locked in.
There's a sickening amount of money on the table as well now, actually.
Yeah.
If you think about it, just because you've got you've got no, we've basically got a unipolar world with Salah being your only premium. With I don't know what the armchair physios on Twitter are saying, but I'm assuming they're saying that, you know, it's a rolled ankle. He's a tough cookie. He might carry on, but he might be out for 2 or 3 weeks. I know he left the stadium on crutches in the protective boot. Pep was saying on Haaland doesn't know the extent of his injury. And then with Wood, I think that, you know, maybe that's one to come back to in 34. Because their fixtures are pretty good after that, I believe. So it's assuming that fixture goes back into 34, of course. But yeah, that kind of, it all sort of seems to knit together to say that you can put together like a team with decent depth as well. And then it's just a case of whether Haaland does come back in time for the 33 double game week, and then what you're going to do if that does come to pass. But in the short term, say you store your money up in Phil Foden, and you've got to assume that, you know, because Marmoush and him have been kind of jostling for the spot in behind Haaland a little bit. With Haaland out, at least for Leicester, you've got to assume that Marmoush does play that up front. Who plays behind him? Probably Foden. And suddenly you've got kind of a bit of a store of money in that. You can put a hell of a lot in the bank. I'm not going to lie, I've just been having a look at it slightly while you were talking. I was listening. I'm good at multitasking. And it's just wild, really, what you can do, and kind of the contingencies that you can have at play. And God, it does feel like, you know, one or both of us are going to be kind of taking the gamble, taking the plunge fairly soon. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I think, which may push people, I did mention earlier on that there's a lot of situations, and you mentioned this as well in terms of Crystal Palace and Glasner. If you are sat there with your wild card and your assistant manager on top of things like your triple captain and bench boost, there is surely a huge case to wildcard now.
Yeah.
And the assistant manager in 31, where you've got a couple of quite juicy looking fixtures on the table for table bonus, in Emery at home versus Nottingham Forest. And I believe it's Potter at home versus Bournemouth as well, potentially, which could be quite interesting ones. And then first two for 33, just shoving it on Glasner and hoping to get the same sort of positivity that we got from his single game week. I mean, there's quite a few worlds, I think, where a wildcard does make sense, to just extend your analogy even further there, Sam.
Yeah, and just a very quick one, an assistant manager, because I've seen a few tweets and things on Blue Sky about not wanting to play it in 32, 33 because it blocks using other chips during those double game weeks. I would still prioritize the assistant manager. I like the upside is huge. And with the bench boost in particular, which is going to be very popular in game week 33, for instance, you can still only have a maximum of 12 double game weekers if these fixtures go into game week 33. So you're still only going to get the benefit of at most one extra fixture on your bench, because you can only have 12 players with doubles, and therefore 3 of your players only have a single game week. Those will be your bench players in most cases, one of which will probably be Salah for most people, but still it's a single. And then those 3, you'll only have one on the bench with a double at most. And I've seen a lot of drafts already who won't even have that. So you could theoretically play that bench boost in another week and have just as many fixtures sat on your bench ready to go. So just find another good week for it. Whereas with the assistant manager, if you get 2 shots at that bonus, from experience, both of us can attest to it, it can be huge. So I would prioritize the assistant manager in those weeks personally. Now, if you've got bench boost and triple captain, then maybe that swings it very slightly, because you've got to then cram those into other weeks somewhere. But I think I'd still maybe favor assistant manager and just look at using triple captain and bench boost in a single potentially.
Whew, I mean, dear me.
It's a lot to think about.
There is a lot to think about, and I suspect that this pod shelf life can be quite short, but there's a lot of thinking to do within that time frame. It may be worth then trying to preview the week ahead through the lens of potential wildcarding and not as far as we possibly can. So the knee jerk, as Sam said earlier on, was planned to be if you. What would you do, as this pod was initially going to be called? So I think it is called with Chris Woods, and we were going to be spending time, going over Mateta. If you sold Isaac, would you buy him back, and all this sort of thing. But the Haaland injury, at least for us, has complicated things to such an extent that maybe it does kind of feel like it's time to go through to hit that wild card. I was going to ask you questions such as, at what point do you hit wild card? What is our expected wild card? What are we going to do if we were going to wild card? Focus where? And I think we will kind of go over that a little bit actually through here and the best transfers in. I think this pod has kind of evolved into that more than I think this was going to be the pod next week, and I feel like it's kind of this is what it is now. Yeah. But hey, here we go. So yeah, I think to deal with these 2 things first, I remember earlier on I said that Jamie said that he could take a -4 and just kind of deal with one of them, log with the other one on his bench and deal with it. I suppose that does kind of make you think that Mateta's the one. Now, there were friend of the pod, James, I said, was at the Palace Fulham game and said that he just didn't look good at all. Wasn't moving properly. It wasn't moving kind of quite in the same way. And then there was a couple of posts on social media. There's one on Reddit that said he looked like SHIT, that's uncoordinated, was not his usual aggressive self. It was his first game back, and it could be one thing. It could be kind of the psychological effects of the horrible kind of challenge. But I suppose Larson had basically his hand chopped off, didn't he, and scored a brace against Southampton for Wolves. And so it's one of those that, yes, okay, the player's not looking great, but the quality of the opposition is such. And with a double or 2 double game weeks coming up, however that sort of manifests itself, it does kind of seem like the best pick is still Mateta, and despite that sort of initial grass eye test sort of review of his performances since his return to playing.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And look, he didn't have the best day at the office against Fulham, but it is Fulham. They're a good defensive side, and it's not easy to break them down. Obviously, they won 3-0. Palace played amazingly. Mateta just didn't have the best day. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily due to the injury. Some players just have an off day sometimes. So I probably wouldn't be overthinking that necessarily, especially when it's your free chip effectively against Southampton the following week. I would be very surprised if he didn't cash in on that fixture, followed by 2 double game weeks, like you say. I don't really want to overthink it with him, and I think I am able to tie myself up in knots sometimes with FPL, trying to think of a narrative to go against the grain. But Mateta, at the end of the day, was in red hot form before the injury, and the injury wasn't like a hamstring or anything like that. It was to his ear, which isn't, obviously it might affect him aerially a little bit, but I don't think it'll affect him as a player. And him moving a bit sheepishly or slowly, I think is just subjective, and I don't think it's necessarily correct. It's just a bad day. And I think it was FPL Therapy that brought up the data on Mateta. Last 10 game weeks, he's top, above Salah, above Haaland, of all players for XGI per 90. Same goes for last 8. Same goes for last 6. So whatever window you want to cut it into, he is the informed player in the league. So with Southampton, the best fixture to have away from home, which again, Palace are very good away from home and Southampton are horrifically bad at home. Just go for it. Honestly, just go for it. He's on pens. I'm 99% sure he is. The minutes should be fine because he was taken off early in the cup. Honestly, I wouldn't overthink it.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. The only thing that might make you think again is Isaac, who's obviously had the rest, has Leicester in 31. If you're not planning to wildcard this week, thinking and hold it off, or indeed if you have used your wildcards, you've sold him. I think if you have used your wildcard, you probably didn't sell him. But if you did, I think it might be kind of potentially worth a look to bring him back. Brentford, who they've got up next, have been pretty good defensively this year, I believe. But I think the home and away has not been particularly kind of good to them, especially in away games against teams that are probably, I guess, better than them in terms of the overall. And I think that might be something that you kind of think about a little bit. So they're kind of mid-table for XGA away. Sorry, no, they're not. They're they are mid-table for XGA away. So I think that's probably it's something that's worth mentioning. Don't know how drunk they've got on their Carling Cup.
I was going to say
grade. Anthony Gordon in particular definitely came off as a bit of a vibe, didn't he? But Isaac, obviously, you know the character he is. He's going to be the kind of the chalk captain in 31 and almost definitely in 34 as well. The Ipswich game at home. I don't know actually.
And 32.
Yeah, and 32 actually, of course. So you've got 3 captaincies coming up for Isaac. If it's a kind of a straight shootout between the two, I do think that kind of the Swede does sort of complicate matters a little bit, doesn't he?
He does, but again, if it's just a 1 week thing, I think I'd still prioritize Mateta personally. I do like Isak. Obviously, I would love to have him this week against Brentford, but I think out of the two, Mateta just shades it. One, because obviously Isak's been playing international football over the break. Mateta hasn't had to worry about that. He's just been getting himself fit and firing again. He's also been drinking in the last couple of days, which shouldn't really have an impact, but maybe there's like a non-conscious like drop of the level after they've just won their first trophy in a generation. They might take their eye off the ball a little bit. And they're without Anthony Gordon as well, which might also affect them going forwards a little bit. All of that to say, I still think he's a fantastic option for this week. I still think he'll do very well. It's just if I was prioritizing one or the other for one game week alone, then I would probably still look at Mateta. If you're not looking at wildcarding for the next 4 or 5 weeks, or you've already used a wildcard, it probably is Isak because, like you say, he's the standout captain for 3 of the next 4 potentially. So yeah, longer term, I think Isak's the better pick. But if it's just for this game week, I'd probably lean towards Mateta.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think he was going to be the one that I do. It depends how much stock you put in the old eye test, I guess. But certainly just feels like a bit of a no-brainer, I guess, on paper. In that situation, there's Evan Nilsson as well.
Yeah,
we should mention the only sort of but probably about Evan Nilsson. He did get subbed off actually.
About 70 minutes in today.
70 minutes. So he's probably going to be all right, I suspect, for Ipswich, which again, probably kind of is another nail in the coffin of me not using the wild card, just because it would be kind of relying on Dango starting to get me to 11 with a -4. And I think that kind of, I suppose he could do a job in the very short term. So if you're kind of just looking for, you know what, I'm going to hold out for one more week, get a bit more information, midweek games, or as a bit of a difficult one, then I think that he certainly makes sense as a candidate to bring in for this week, especially if you've got a few problems with the amount of money that you've got left in the bank, for example.
Yeah, precisely that. I was just about to say the same thing regarding Wood, especially if you don't have the money to upgrade to Mateta or Isak, then rather than taking hits and moving other players out, then just going straight to Evan Nilsson for 1 week only. If you wanted to save that information in wildcard the following week, Evan Nilsson for 1 week looks like a great bet. But again, if you've got the money, I would probably still prioritize Mateta or Isak.
Cool. So I think it's pretty cut and dried actually this week. I think that there are other options out there, of course, But I think that's probably the focus way of doing it. But yeah, the bigger monster is obviously going to be the best transfers in. So there's an awful lot going on, and the market hasn't quite reacted yet to what's been happening in terms of the Haaland situation. I don't know actually, Sam, what the pickup rate was for Haaland, because obviously it was slightly obscured by the free hit numbers that were played last week. Neither of us played ours, of course. It sat around kind of 31% at the moment in terms of ownership. But yeah, the market hasn't quite picked up on it yet in terms of sales. He's got kind of 50k sales. I suspect that's going to probably rise quite a lot. So there were quite a lot of transfers in last week
when the flags added.
Yeah, when the flags added, it will go. But you've got the likes of Bruno being brought in. I think that a lot of those transfers were probably made last week. But Marmoush, Isaac, Sarr, and Munoz making up the top 5. I think those ones particularly, I think we can discount Bruno as maybe slightly reactionary play by a lot of people, despite the fact what we said when Simon was on a moon ago, that he's obviously got those numbers and got the mins and got the attacking verb about him. And like Palmer, Palmer's the biggest sale for as has been for weeks, almost 600,000 sales for him. Looking likely he will play Spurs on Thursday, but I don't know whether he's going to make it into our wild cards. Possibly not. Trent, 400,000 sales, injured. Don't think he'll be coming back. Woods, I'd mentioned earlier on that I don't know if I did actually. But Nuno said last Thursday he was seeing a specialist. The other day, it wasn't looking particularly good for Woods. 430,000 transfers for him. And then you've got likes of Hall and Bumo being sold. And I suppose let's kind of home in very quickly on Crystal Palace, just because obviously, given how bad, sadly, the bottom 3 are, any opportunity to target those is going to be taken with gusto. And it comes as no surprise, I don't think, that you've got Sarr, who we both had. I don't know if you joined me on this particular negative flirtation, but I had a couple of weeks with him after he scored the 17 points versus Brighton. Did absolutely bugger all. Last couple of weeks, he's registered 2 double-digit returns at Southampton next. So no surprise that he's back in people's thoughts. And of course, Munoz, with Trent injured, we both thought, yeah, okay, he's going to rise. he's going to go through the roof. Neither of us want Trent anymore. Let's just get this sorted. And the idea at the time was, hey, you know what? Well, we'll be done for this game week already. But as it's transpired, more things need to happen. In midfield, let's stick with Sarr, just because there's another player who's come onto the scene, Ebi Eze, a player who I've always kind of been a little bit hot and cold on. Sometimes I think, oh yeah, especially at towards the end of seasons, I feel like that's Eze time, because I feel like during the season proper, sometimes he can play hot and cold, and he also. Glasner points this out as well, has been a little bit unlucky. He said that he's not scored as many goals as he'd have liked this year. But I mean, remember the first kind of few weeks of the season, Sam, when he scored a really good free kick. Yeah. And there's been so many sort of moments where it's not quite come together for him for whatever reason. We'd use the V word, variance about that. And Sarr's got kind of the goals, I guess, in his locker. Eze's got, I suppose, the XGI in his locker a bit more, and albeit Sarr has been getting assists as well. And I think that's quite an interesting sort of 50-50 to look at, because if you're assuming that, say, Munoz is the defender of choice, which I think he probably is, I don't know whether you want him and Henderson. We can talk about that maybe. And I suppose Mateta is one that you should stick in. Eze versus Sarr. I mean, I did watch your video the other week, last week, I think it was, and you had both of them, didn't you? And no Mateta. But now I think maybe things have changed a little bit.
Yeah, I think since that video, we've just got more information on Mateta, so it's made it easier to pick him and maybe downgrade Eze a little bit. So I do like Eze. I think if I can have him in the side, that would be great. But we don't have 4 Palace spots, and I prefer Munoz and I prefer Sarr, and obviously we've spoken about Mateta too. So yeah, with Eze, I do quite like him, but he's a million more than Sarr. He's getting outstatted by Sarr, not just in terms of actual output, but in terms of the XGI per 90, quite considerably as well. He's lost some set pieces in the last few months as well. Wharton's taking some of the corners. I think Hughes is taking corners as well sometimes as well. So he's not as talismanic as he was. And again, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Tom. How many goals do you think Eze's got in the league this year? Just without checking.
Good God. 1 or 2? I think it's going to be really low, isn't it?
I'm pretty sure it's 2. I'm going to have to double check that. But when I was doing my research, I think he's got 8 attacking returns in total, and 6 of them are assists. So it's not been a great season for him, and his data's actually been around 0.44 XGI per 90. So Sarr is massively outstatting him, cheaper, and is a flat track bully. We've seen in recent game weeks, he's had some phenomenal output in terms of the XG data in recent weeks, especially. So yeah, I think he would be my preference out of the 2. I think the reason I looked at that double midfield to begin with earlier this week was under the assumption that Haaland would be fit, and therefore I'd have to find a way to squeeze him into the draft. And Mateta probably was a bridge too far, and Evanilson obviously offers that great value, and at that point in time still had a chance of a double game week. That's off the table. Haaland's potentially off the table. And there are a lot of other midfielders I like the look of, but not tons of strikers. And Mateta is definitely one of the top strikers I like. So yeah, he's probably my 4th favorite Palace, but doesn't quite make it in for me right now. Plus, I've not got the best team value, so having that extra million is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I feel you. And I was thinking about, I mentioned Saka earlier on. I think it's been mentioned in the chat as well. I don't know who, I think it's by Dan actually, that, there's he's leaving money in the bank potentially for Saka. Yeah. And all of these things do sort of knit together, that if you can scrimp an extra million here, probably won't need it right now, but it might be something that could be really useful when it comes to those doubles dropping. Like when Saka is back, if the double drops from 33, he said a couple of games to kind of get up to speed, then suddenly, hey, you know what? Raya, Gabriel, Saka, I find it very difficult to look past those 3. Yeah. It's an optimal solution for Arsenal. And I've had Raya since the start. And it may be actually the first time ever, Sam, I've had a player throughout the course of the entire season with Raya. I think it's really, really likely that's actually going to happen. But Gabriel and Saka, those 3, I think are going to be quite good. So, I think there's definitely kind of a few ways to kind of save money in that. I just mentioned Raya there. Munoz, yeah, very good. So say you want a Mateta, you want a Sarr. Is Henderson, is he kind of your 5th favourite Palace then?
Yeah.
It gets really difficult, doesn't it, in terms of the goalkeepers in general, when you're looking at transfers in or wild card keepers and all this sort of thing. Like, I suppose we have to maybe resign ourselves to the fact that on our double game week, that maybe we won't be looking at having both keepers doubling. Like, any kind of wildcard draft I've had, I think I sent you like a pre-Haaland injury one earlier on. Any wildcard draft that I have has had Areola in as the backup keeper who's playing as the cheapest price. I think that in 33 they've got Southampton. So I mean, that works out quite nicely, doesn't it, really? So, it kind of feels like a bit of a no-brainer to go there. And Munoz, one of Sarr or Eze, depending on your temperament, and Mateta, they feel like the 3 best. So maybe Henderson's the one who just misses out alongside one of the midfielders.
Yeah, I think pound for pound, Henderson is probably the best keeper to have. He's still only 4.6 million. He's, I think, the 3rd top scoring keeper, and obviously 2 double game weeks in a row. He would be a lock for most people if it wasn't for the fact that Palace had so many really good attacking assets. And that then when you add on the fact that actually looking at the doubles and the fixtures within them, I don't really back them to get many clean sheets in that. So the only real reason I've got Munoz is because his attacking data is so good. And then there's the outside chance of a clean sheet to consolidate that and make it quite a special game week for him. With Henderson, barring some sort of lucky assist from a goal kick or something, it's very unlikely he gets any attacking output. So the clean sheets in those 2 doubles, I'm not as confident. And therefore, when they're really good attacking options, I prefer to prioritize them. Like you say, Raya makes a lot of sense. You could look at Martinez potentially. And then also Areola with the Southampton game in 33 all make a load of sense. So I think for me, sadly, Henderson just misses out, but I do like him. If you, for whatever reason, didn't want any other 3 Palace, then any other of the 3 Palace, then yeah, maybe. But he's probably my 5th favourite Palace option.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think that Areola's, just given the price you always want to scrimp and save on goalkeepers at 4.2. It just feels like old Tits McGee is the one that you should go with there, really.
He's going to be on your bench every other week as well.
Yes, absolutely fine. That's fine. That's more than fine, especially if I've got Raya as the goalkeeper, which I'm pretty okay with, let's be honest. Sticking with the we mentioned the forwards earlier on. I just realized we didn't mention Marmoush, which is probably a bit stupid, wasn't it? And because Marmoush is obviously against Leicester, a goal off the bench, crucially was benched, and we maybe be kind of in the situation of going, oh yeah, what's going on here? Oh, it might be an absolute disaster. The reality is that obviously without Haaland and the game's in 2 days, I'm pretty sure he's going to start Leicester. Breaking news, and surely he's of interest to everybody, really, and a bit of a stick on any wild card, really, as well, isn't he? Really good option, I think, Mr. Marmoush. Obviously like the cut of his jib from the old Bundesliga days, and even a potential kind of captaincy pick this week potentially as well. If you want to go against the grain with Salah, so it kind of feels like he's nailed on if you're wild carding or if you're transferring. Pick in, really, isn't he?
Yeah, it's a weird one with Marmoush because the eye test and the data really tell a different story on him. Like, the data isn't anything special. I think he's running along at 0.4142 XGI per 90, which for a City striker isn't great. But given the fact his minutes should get a little pump now with Haaland potentially out, and actually even before now was getting 70 plus every single week pretty much. It makes a lot of sense. He's a good price at just over 7 million. Even though the data's maybe not telling a great story on the pitch, and like with my own 2 eyes, you can tell he's a talented guy. He likes getting his shots away. He's getting into central areas. He does play well off of Haaland as well. So even if Haaland's injury isn't too bad and he comes back before game week 33, I think there's still a pretty strong argument to say that Marmoush is still in that starting 11 and still okay for both of those games. So yeah, I really like him. I think that front 3 of Mateta, Isak, Marmoush on a wild card is going to be very popular. And like you say, yeah, I mean, it will be a very heavily Egyptian-shaped captain this week, but whether that's Marmoush or Salah, that's up to your risk appetite, I guess.
Yeah, it's I get the feeling that he's going to be very suddenly. I've had him for absolutely ages, actually, but out of nowhere he's going to become a bit, well, absolutely, I say absolutely ages in terms of time rather than game weeks.
Yeah, it's like 3 game weeks.
And I got him in for Tottenham, right, and Tottenham Hotspur, I should say, before the lawyers come at me. Got him in for that in the game week 27, which unbelievably was the 25th of February. So I've had him for over a month in my team, and I think he'll be staying there. Staying with City, Sam, it kind of feels like, but Foden would be an interesting kind of short-term pick, but it kind of feels like Marmoush and Vardiol were probably the 2. I mean, there were some rumours, and I think you told me about this actually, because I've been so tuned out. There's some rumours that Guardiola wasn't fit, but he did play the last game, and given the dearth of resources they've got at the back, I'm sure that he's going to keep playing. I mean, those 2 I feel like are absolute stick-ons, really. If you are going to wildcard this week. Foden is an interesting one, isn't he? Just been very much out of sorts, and obviously didn't cover himself in glory for England either. Maybe one that kind of just misses the cut, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. I do quite like the idea of Foden for a short-term one, and I'm trying to see if there's a way I squeeze him in for Leicester. At 9.2 million, he went on that little hot streak in the middle of the season, not too long ago now. And I don't know, I've always just really liked him, and it's a subjective point of view, but I think he's got a level above where he's at right now to get to. And I think if Haaland is out, he'll probably be playing a little bit more centrally. He got brought off early today. And given that KDB got good minutes today, I think it's very likely that he was brought off early because they plan on starting him against Leicester. And if you only plan on needing him for a couple of weeks before maybe making a switch to Gordon or to Saka, for instance, then I think it could make sense as a short-term upside pick, considering he looks pretty likely to get the Leicester game at the very least. And then you can use that money to make the hop across to a Saka or a Gordon potentially. So yeah, I'm seeing if there's a way I can do it. I think the only almost psychological point for me not wanting to do it is once I've got him, I'm going to find it difficult to lose him considering he's got that double game week to come. So if I buy him, I need to almost like tell myself this has to be a short-term thing because I just don't have the confidence that he does start both of those games later on. And I think someone like a Saka is going to be much more important to have come game week 33. So I need to write it down and just say, you know what, that's a locked in move if I'm going to buy him in the first place, because I can't just let him stay in my team because I think that is probably too risky down the line.
I'll tell you what's also a bit of a pain this week. If you really think about this week coming up, we've just previewing this week solidly. And if you were wildcarding, so you have Raya in goal potentially, well, probably. And then you have Gabriel, who you probably are going to be playing or at least owning. And I think there's probably going to be some worries about benching him. He's not scored a goal since game week 13, 14.
He hasn't had a shot in 6 or 7 game weeks now.
Yeah, it was West Ham, wasn't it? I think he needs to be a bit of a big Dan Burn, just grow a little bit, doesn't he? But I think you're probably still going to be looking at him. If you are wildcarding this week, you probably want a Bournemouth defender who's almost likely going to be Kirkes, just because he didn't play the last game, or Howson, because they're both suspended, weren't they? Although Sinesai's back, so is that going to be a concern for Howson? Probably not in this game, but it might be going forward. You've got Munoz. You're probably going to be wildcarding into Guardiola, let's face it. So you've suddenly got 4 defenders who are pretty good this week. In midfield, you've got Kluivert, who you're probably going to have. Salah, of course. And then your kind of Sar character. And then you're probably going to want, I don't know, we'll speak about Jacob Murphy in a minute, a player like that on the bench. And then if you're having Foden in, yeah, okay, he could play. But then up front, you're probably going to go with Isaac, Matessa and Marmoush, aren't you? So where does Foden actually fit in this week? It becomes a bit of a question too. So one for you, Sam, potentially, that I've just kind of, I'm literally just making this up on the fly, but actually it might make sense. Could you like buy Saka to save yourself a transfer and just bench him for this week, not knowing if he's going to play or not, and just have him there ready to go as the days go by? Because we don't need to worry about money, do we? Because we don't need Haaland. We don't need Haaland at the moment. We don't need Palmer at the moment, probably. So could you just have Saka kind of sat on your bench, save yourself a transfer going forward, and then hunky dory when the double game comes in and when he's looking like he's starting again, hey presto, you've got this amazing asset straight in your team.
Yeah, so he's currently in my wildcard draft. I don't expect him to start at the moment, but it's saving a transfer down the line, and that will be valuable. And I don't think he's a million miles away from playing. So yeah, probably bench him this week. It's not the greatest fixture ever against Fulham anyway, and then you can start a Murphy or maybe a 4th defender. So you actually mentioned there that 4 defenders are pretty much locked in or look very likely for you, but which of those 4 are you going to bench this week would be my question. Because
go 4-3-3, I think, especially if you go with...
This is the thing. So if you went 4-3-3, you can probably accommodate Saka, whereas if you go 3-4-3, then that Saka spot becomes a little bit iffy, because you do want to attack that 4th midfielder. You want someone who's obviously Murphy's been decent and has Brentford, but it doesn't fill you with excitement, I don't think. And maybe having someone like a Foden or a Palmer actually as well might be more exciting for this week. If Gordon was fit, it would change the narrative. If Gordon wasn't suspended, it would change the narrative completely, I think. But alas, he is. So maybe there is an argument to say Saka in the draft, put him on the bench, start 4 at the back, including Kirkes, who, by the way, is not in my draft at the moment.
Okay.
And then, you can just have him later on down the line without needing that transfer.
But the idea would be that Kirkes would go off to, someone doubling, I guess. Maybe it fills me with dread, but someone like Conser or something just for the double game week. But I think for this week, Kirkes being what he is just kind of feels like an okay sort of short-term pick. I mean, that's absolutely fine as well, because at the end of the day, there's a lot more upside to having no Kirkes, shoving in Foden for a couple of weeks. And yeah, that's something that definitely I'm considering. It's just that with a very low repertoire of free transfers on my list, I've got a bit of a problem there with that one. So I think that there's going to have to be some builds surrounding trying to mitigate against some negative impacts and some future projection that goes into it. And Saka on the bench is certainly something that in my wildcard draft, which I have, does seem to have occurred. Newcastle, obviously, firstly, 2 of the double coming up. Isaac nailed on. 1 of Burn or Livramento, maybe Burn, just because he's got these big Dan Burn energy, could get you a goal. Probably is the one. I know that you're probably going to have some Livramento propaganda as an ex-Saint. And then we've got your man Jacob Murphy, Sam, who I posted on Blue Sky the other day that his underlying data is actually really good. I genuinely did not even clock this until I kind of was just moseying around on FPL earlier on yesterday, and just noticed he was 3rd for XGI, just behind Gordon, and he's also 3rd for XGI per 90, ahead of Gordon. I think it's Barnes in 2nd, obviously behind the ubiquitous Isaac. But yeah, what a differential! Maybe not differential now, but what an enabler at that price he is. You just need him for a couple of weeks, and after that, you can happily sit on your bench at 5, couldn't he? Really?
Yeah, and I think to begin with, when they had both Barnes and Gordon to begin with, and they were trying to fit them both in, Murphy was the one to drop out, and it felt a bit risky. But we've landed in a situation now where Howe knows for certain who his favourite right winger is, and that is Murphy. And Barnes and Gordon are kind of competing on the left-hand side. Maybe Murphy gets taken off a little bit earlier sometimes, and one of them gets shifted over to the right-hand side for 20 minutes at the end. But there's no question, if you look at the starting data for Murphy, he's started almost every game this season now. So there's no real risk there. You would feel very safe having him as a starter, and you only really need to play him in a couple of the game weeks. It's not all of the weeks that you need to rely on him for. And considering Gordon is suspended anyway, for 2.4 million cheaper, if his data is almost as good, I think it just makes logical sense to save the money there. Again, another one that I was during the week thinking, oh great, if I wildcard I can have him, and most people won't. Looks like everyone's going to have him now, because everyone's like sort of clocked that his data's good and his minutes are good, and obviously Gordon's suspended. But I am kind of wondering, because he's currently on my bench for game week 30 if I do wildcard. I'm wondering if we get good news about Gordon and he's not injured as well as suspended, could I potentially just bench Gordon this week on a wild card if I could find another 4th midfielder I like? And then that's the differential, because I actually think Murphy's ownership is going to be a lot higher than Gordon's in the next few weeks now. And I do just wonder if there's an argument to say maybe have a look at Gordon instead if you're chasing. But I'm finding that really hard to find that 2.4 million spare to make that move happen. So it probably is going to end up being Murphy.
Yeah, I mean, Bruno G is another one who's just kind of 4th behind Jacob Murphy, but his per 90 isn't very good and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Freed up a lot by Snarly, actually, into that sort of box-to-box sort of thing, but the end product probably isn't quite there. With Murphy as well, I think that there is going to be, I mean, you mentioned obviously the in-game, the game state sort of thing. There's also Harvey Barnes who's hanging around, like when Gordon is back and fit, then something you might end up in a situation where maybe Barnes plays one of the games, especially if Murphy is jaded. You just don't know really with that one. The point on Gordon as well, if you did have him this week and you were wildcarding Sam, you could kind of stick your Newcastle defender as first bench and have a bench of Gordon and Saka, couldn't you? And then have a Kirkes or something as your fourth defender. So yeah, there's quite a few ways to play it. On Kirkes, I think it's worth mentioning Bournemouth here, who are going to be part of the mix for the rest of the year. I think it's fair to say maybe lost a bit of momentum recently. Yeah. And 3 losses and 1 draw in the last 4 games, but still putting up the data, I think, overall the Cherries. And I think for the very short term at least, are going to be a team who are going to factor in. I think Kluivert is one of those players who just kind of sticks around. I think it's going to be quite difficult to maybe until kind of we hit the proper double season. But he's going to be a player who just sort of stick around for a lot of people for the short term. And a player like, as I said, a Howson or a Kirkes does feel like kind of an okay sort of inclusion on the wild card, especially with the cherry of Ipswich up next. I think that looks okay, doesn't it? But I mean, both players probably do have potentially a little bit of a ticking clock next to them. So, for example, a Cliver could go out for the Villa double, a Rodgers or an Asensio or a Rashford. I mean, all of these players they offer an adequate escape route, don't they, as well? So I don't know. I feel like I'm quite comfortable with a Kirkes or a Cliver, Sam, within a wild card that I'd be doing and keeping those two, especially with Ipswich up next. I think that those two do seem kind of quite okay kind of inclusions. Are you just kind of purely on Clivert then? No Kirkes, just one Bournemouth, or do you have Evan Nilsson for the short term? I don't think it quite works, I said.
Yeah, sadly on Evan Nilsson, he's my fourth favourite striker right now, and I don't need the funds. Obviously, he's a lot cheaper, so if you do, then it makes sense. But if Bournemouth were to double in game week 33, he would have been much more popular, as would Kirkes, and I still think he will be popular. But I think that Kirkes for me is just locking in one too many free transfers down the line. And considering I want to play a 3-4-3 this week, in the week that Kirkes has the best fixture of the lot for the Bournemouth's remaining, I think that I just think it would be better for me to have the defenders in situ that I want to have later on down the line. So Burn, for instance, has a fourth defender, and then probably someone like a Wan-Bissaka or something as the fifth, just to one, save the money, and two, save the transfer later on. For me, makes the most sense. So I currently am rocking up with just one Bournemouth. They've been great, but I don't want to get too distracted just by one good fixture to come against Ipswich, because after that, looking through, it's decent. West Ham away, Fulham home, Crystal Palace away, Man United in 34 when I'm going to free hit anyway, so I can get them back in for that if I want. Then it's Arsenal, Villa, Man City. Game week 38 is against Leicester, but that's a long way away. So I don't think it's the best run. Happy enough having Cliver until we get to game week 33 probably, and then I'll probably ship him off for a Villa asset, or potentially like a Savinho or someone like that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Cool. All right. Any other players to mention within this? Selling Cole Palmer probably is the only thing that I can think of right now as being a potential sort of area of discussion. I watched the new generation, I think it was on Amazon the other day, and he came across really well. Cole Palmer, not the idiot that the social media memes will make it out to be. 3-4 really good attacking fixtures coming up, and probably one of those players that we're going to be hiding behind the sofa from really for the rest of the year, starting with game week 31, where I suspect that we're both going to have activated our wild cards either during this pod or tonight. So we're both going to be kind of very worried about Cole Palmer for the rest of the year, I think. Don't know how much of that's going to be live ownership, but still a player that if you have held through until now, maybe you would be thinking, yeah, you know what, actually, I'm fine with holding him for Spurs next, and then for the next couple of who, as I said, have not been doing amazingly against top 6, top 8 teams, and Ipswich in 32.
Yeah, I'm again. He's another player that I think is being obviously sold by so many managers. He was injured, so it makes a lot of sense. But I think he's being overlooked a little bit for game week 30 and beyond. I think in the short term, especially because of the price point, having Palmer for just a couple of game weeks for the remaining nice fixtures that Chelsea do have, and then moving across to Saka when we know his fitness will be hopefully by that point fairly clear and guaranteed for the double game week potentially, seems like a pretty good hopping off point and a good time to make that swap. So look, Palmer's been in bad form in terms of output, but he's been getting the chances, he's been getting the data, and maybe this little rest over the international break has done him some good. So I think overlooked because of the price and because he's quite hard to squeeze into a side, especially on a wild card now. But I think if you're looking at someone to kind of hold the spot for Saka for a few weeks and you don't mind having a transfer lined up, then obviously we've mentioned Foden, but Foden's minutes probably aren't as secure as someone like Palmer, and Palmer has the benefit of penalties and better data, and arguably over the 3 better fixtures as well. So yeah, I don't mind having him at all. I understand why people are selling him, given the doubts, but if he's fit for game week 30, I think he's a really decent hold for the next 3.
Yeah, no, okay. I think that yeah, it really is, especially like it'd be interesting to see what kind of situations people have gotten themselves into that mean that they're kind of keeping Palmer, whether it's through belief or whether it's through just having other fish to fry. Just interestingly, I've just seen obviously ex co-host Nick has posted his wild card in our Slack, and it's literally exactly the wild card that we've both sort of been describing. So
Yeah,
it's gonna be really
it's going to be 10 players, isn't it?
We're all going to have the same team. Wildcard 30 is going to have a very, very similar team, aren't we? Oh, dear.
That's a shame, though, because we need to gain rank. We can't have the same team as everyone.
It is. That's why for throwing a Saka on the bench or something like that. But yeah, a lot of it. It's just the state of the game when you get close to the end, isn't it? That we're hoping that people do sort of have different situations and all this sort of thing, because you end up kind of over focusing on people who are in the same situation as you. Right. Okay. Let's move on to bold claims before we debate the captain very quickly. So eon ago, we both failed, struck out. You said Palmer 10+ points versus Arsenal. Didn't play, and Southampton to beat Wolves. You told me to basically
don't
off.
do it.
and you were right. 29, where are you landed?
29 on to 30. I'm actually going to go for Nketiah to outscore Mateta. Obviously he scored in the cup today, and I do envisage Mateta starting and doing very, very well against Southampton, as I've already mentioned, but I'm kind of happiness hedging on this one, and I think that Nketiah is probably going to get 20-30 at the end, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he bagged a brace in that 20 or 30. So yeah, that's my bold claim, Nketiah to outscore Mateta.
Yeah, no, okay. I've got Marmoush's blank versus Leicester. This was initially going to be, of course, a Haaland blank versus Leicester, but I swiftly changed it about 10 minutes before I sat down to do this with you. So,
yeah, it wouldn't have been that bold for Haaland anymore.
No, I think that you wouldn't let me have that. Speaking of Marmoush, best captain this week, I think there's going to be safety in numbers for a lot of people going with Salah, because you've got the big robot off the table. Mikalenko, if Everton have that press conference, I think it'd be really interesting to see what his status is. I believe he's been cleared, or at least he's been in training, so probably you're right. I think it would have been great if Salah had been up against the old man Young. But no, I don't know, Sam, maybe there is a case to maybe have a look at his Egyptian counterpart Marmoush this week. If you are chasing, and if you are kind of quite far back, 800, 900k, maybe this is a decent kind of gambit to take. I moved my captaincy to Marmoush initially, but I feel you think we've kind of both talked each other into wildcarding now, to be honest. So yeah. I think I don't know. I think I'm kind of just about above the threshold of not punting it and just going with Salah this week. But yeah, you're kind of in the fun zone, as it were. I suppose you're still on Salah, are you? Or are you thinking about going elsewhere?
Yeah, I think I'm on Salah. Just that there is safety in numbers, but I do genuinely still think he does very well against Everton. I mean, at every juncture this season, when we've thought maybe this isn't the week for Salah, maybe this is just a more difficult defense to break down, he's gone and got a double-digit haul. So look, there are narratives you can give Liverpool and Salah. Maybe their heads will have dropped. Maybe they'll be not on the beach, but almost like on autopilot for the rest of the season, knowing that the league is almost wrapped up. That all of that, I don't really think that means that much to Salah. He's going to go after all of the records. He'll definitely want a 30-goal season. He will definitely want to play 90 minutes week in, week out now that they're no longer in any other competitions. I think even though Everton have looked decent and they've been good defensively, it's still Salah, and he's been by so far the best player in the league this season. If you wanted to have some fun, Marmouche, yeah, maybe if you're chasing, it could work out against Leicester. Obviously, they're all at sea and they're not a good defence by any means. And then that also brings me on to Crystal Palace against Southampton. I can't overstate how bad the Southampton defence has been. In terms of the XGC data, it's 1 XGC per 90 lower than almost any other team. That is horrendously bad. So if you wanted to take a bit of a gamble, I honestly don't mind Mateta this week, or maybe even a Sarr if you wanted to go against the grain, but I'd probably back the penalty taker on Mateta there. But yeah, for me, it will probably be Salah that gets the armband.
Yeah, no, I think probably about the same, which is it's not the best thing in the world, but it's what it is. I mean, you should have some fun with Marmouche. It's not been fun going against Salah this year, has it?
No,
really. And
never.
as I've said many times, it's always good to just have that sponge and the captaincy just taken away from any other negativity in your team, and just hope the rest of your team deal with it. And again, that's not gone particularly well this year, actually, in terms of hoping that your team do well against the likes of Forest getting a clean sheet, or Chris Wood scoring lots of goals. But yeah, I think that probably it's got to be Salah this week, unfortunately. Onto our teams and plans. I think that this is a bit of a moot point now, actually. I feel like we've both pushed each other into the abyss. A live update. I actually have wildcarded, so.
Oh,
yeah, it's definitely not. We are both going to be wildcarding, aren't we? So
I think so.
The team on screen for you is probably. I don't know how relevant it is. I don't really want to talk through that. Or
Yeah,
you've kind of talked through your plans as it is, haven't you? So I don't know how you can approach however you want. The floor is yours.
Okay. So the way I want to discuss this is whether or not I'm just being crazy. Can I muddle through for this week? Basically, is the question. So Pickford in goal, not a great start away at Liverpool. In defence, it's Munoz, made the transfer early on. Gabriel, who would be in my wildcard side, of course, as well. And then Williams. So I'm 2 out of 3 of what I would want for a wildcard defence this week. Williams is a downgrade, of course, on Gvardiol. In midfield, 5 across the middle, Salah captain. Bruno, obviously great data recently, been in red hot form away at Nottingham Forest, though. Semenyo and Kluivert for the double Bournemouth midfield against Ipswich. So I'm actually leaving behind an extra Bournemouth midfielder if I wildcard this week against a good team to be targeting. And Mbeumo, who, as always, great data, is closing in on 200 points this season away against Newcastle, who obviously great side, but are they going to be a little bit rusty after a long hangover? Who knows? It's possible. The issues really lie in the amount of free transfers I've got and the 2 forwards. So the 2 forwards starting at the moment are Wood at home to Man United. Looks very unlikely to play given some of the rumours that we've seen. And Haaland at home to Leicester. And again, looks pretty unlikely to play considering he's just left the Vitality in a boot and has 2 days between the games. So yeah, I've got João Pedro on the bench at home to Villa, so he could come in. And I think if it was just Wood that was injured, then I'd probably be more tempted to muddle through and just play João Pedro, not need the hit. But now I almost definitely need the hit to get rid of either Wood or Haaland. And even when I do that, for a -4, I'm missing out on one of or 2 of Marmouche, Isak, and Mateta. And I've taken the hit, of course, as well. And there are issues elsewhere in my side that I could optimize for this week. So can I muddle through for a -4 and just take the extra information ahead of game week 31? Or it's probably enough to wildcard, right?
I think what this pod has crystallized in my mind is what's that information actually worth in our in our mutually shared situation, having done the transfer early. The information that we've got is that we know incontrovertibly, and OFPL have tweeted that there's a blank game week in 34 for these teams, which means that there's going to be a double game week for those teams at some point. 33 is the best guess. 36, it may happen, but there seems to be a bit of a protectionist attitude surrounding the FA Cup at the moment. So I think that we've got enough, is what I'm going to say, despite the fact that I'd always kind of thought, hey, you know what, I'm going to leave it until I've got max information, 31, 32. But I think we've got enough information to put teams together which are going to be able to contest stuff for the rest of the season, the remaining 10, 11% of the season. And I think that, there aren't, if we didn't know the identities of those teams, Sam, then I'd be saying no. Take -4, just kind of get that information. But the remaining bit of information is when those fixtures happen, rather than if those fixtures are going to happen.
Yeah,
Right? And I think that the if now that has been ticked off, I think there's
we know
probably
which
enough.
sides. Yeah,
There's enough confidence to think, hey, you know what? I think I'm probably going to be all right here. And there is always going to be one character or two characters, like Cole. Back in the day, Luca Dean when he played for Everton was a really big example of this. Had no doubles whatsoever. We're talking about 2017, 2018 season. No doubles, no nothing. And then he went off on like a streak of like 9, 10, 11, 12 pointers. There is always going to be a player like that. And there's going to be a player that you removed from your team now who, are probably going to be Boomer, let's face it, who goes off against Newcastle. That is probably going to happen, but you can't really kind of beat yourself up about something like that. It does kind of feel like we've got enough information at the moment, and it's not necessarily that you're setting yourself up for a 33 bench boost. Like if a 33 bench boost doesn't happen, if 33 doesn't land that way it said earlier on, that's actually better because you get to save those transfers, don't you, through 33. And if it does happen, okay, well, you've wildcarded now and your team's sort of optimized to kind of take that on anyway. So yeah, I think that probably to save yourself the hit, probably save yourself a couple of hits, to be fair, because I mean, if you go into next week, you're going to either wildcard anyway and think, oh crap, I could have done it last week and have had a week of triple Palace against Southampton, could have had a week of triple City against Leicester. It does kind of feel like the balance of probabilities does seem to be on the table. I think probably going to be reflected in review. I haven't looked yet, but it feels like to grab the EV, as it were, this is probably the time to do it. So yeah, it kind of feels like even though your team isn't riven with injuries, we're not talking about kind of having kind of 4 or 5 players out, but there's so many kind of places you could just side grade, upgrade, just optimize for the upcoming kind of back 9 of the season effectively. Like you're probably not going to hit an all-in-one through the back 9, but you might get a couple of birdies, a couple of eagles, an albatross or 2, and you'll be really, really happy with that. So it kind of feels like it's worth doing now and not having that sort of underpowered wild card in a couple of weeks where this week especially, where you've got a couple of really good teams playing not so good teams that you can make the best of. Maybe Bournemouth versus Ipswich is one that maybe you're going to have to sacrifice. But yeah, it kind of feels like your team's very similar to mine. What mine was. And I think you're probably going to be spending, I don't know how much work you got to do tomorrow morning, but you might have to come to it late because you may have wildcarded and spending the rest of the night before you go to bed looking at a wildcard.
Well, it sounds like a lot of it's locked in anyway, doesn't it? From the looks of this pod, I think we ran through a full 15 at different moments during the show. So, yeah, unfortunately, it might be a bit template, and a lot of the thinking will be how can you differentiate and how can you gain that edge over others? Maybe that's a Saka, maybe that's a Foden, maybe it's a Palmer. I don't know, but there will be marginal gains to be made. And I think, again, just having that 15 will in itself be differential. We always say that, like, it's a compound differential in itself, having the team you've got. And as long as they're the ones getting the points, then the arrows should be green. So yeah, I mean, I'm not active yet. I will probably activate straight after this. Just a quick check on Twitter to make sure all hell hasn't broken loose and there's a load of like doubles being shifted to a week that we didn't expect, and some random team gets a blank we didn't expect. Who knows? But I'll double check that and probably activate straight after this pod.
It just doesn't. I don't know. Again, famous last words, but it doesn't feel like that's particularly likely given like the nature of the upcoming schedule and where the 3 weeks are. There's not
there's
loads.
not many places to go. Yeah,
Exactly. So it's not like you're sticking it into giving it all up to RN Jesus or a random number generator and just hoping for the best. Like there's only a couple of places it could possibly manifest itself.
The only other place is 35, isn't it?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Realistically, because it can't be 32 because Palace already have a double in 32. It can't be 36 because they'll use that as the reserve week for other doubles from the final of the FA Cup. So it has to be 33 or 35, right? It can't be anywhere else.
And if it does happen in 35, like, you might think, oh my god, you've messed it up
Might
because
be
you got optimized for 33. Actually, it might be loads better because of 32 and 33 not really kind of tessellating together very well. So yeah. But if you aren't wildcarding this week, I think that you're probably going to be all right as well, to be honest. I think that it does land very well. Most people who aren't wildcarding this week are probably going to be sat there with probably double triple Palace at least. If you have rated last week, especially, you're probably going to be in quite a good position, aren't you? So yeah, I think that's probably all right, to be honest. But yeah, if it was you, I'd probably be looking at wildcard right now.
Yeah, fair. Do you want to run through your old team by any chance, or I think it's almost pointless now, isn't it?
I'll just mention like kind of where we're looking. So I kind of described the 4-3-3 to you earlier on. I think this is kind of how it's going to hold, really. So
can I guess your full 15?
Of course you can.
That could be fun. Okay, your full 15 is going to be Raya Areola. It's going to be, oh God, I hope I get this. Gabriel, Gvardiol, Munoz, Kirkez, and Big Dan Burn.
Yep.
That's 5. Midfield, Salah, obviously. Cliver, Sarr, Saka on your bench, and Murphy.
Yep.
And up front is the 3 we're all going to have, which is Marmoush, Isak, and Mateta. Wow,
hey, you've done it. Very, very
and
easy.
honestly, that's not going to be far off mine either. So.
No. The only question that needs to be asked is, as with what you were saying earlier on, do I give up Kirkez, give up Saka, and go with Foden, and then stick Konsa or something on my bench? That's the only question I've got. The rest of it, I mean, if you've played this game for a while, it's quite easy to be efficient, and I'm sure there may be a couple of people kind of going, "Oh, what about this player? What about that player?" Look, it's just efficiency, and you can see that that's probably the most efficient team to deal with the short term with the doubles. How they're going to land. The rest of it is all in the ether, and it says a lot that it's very guessable, and I completely understand why you might be looking at it and thinking, "Oh God, content creators, blah blah blah." But it is what it is, and especially then this happens at the end of every season with the late wild card. If you do wild card in the 30s, and just kind of it really is kind of down to, do I spend a bit more money on Gordon or something and just chance it this week rather than Jacob Murphy? I think we'll find out from how Gordon's doing, despite the fact he's not been suspended. Or do you believe how? And it's whether
he's suspended.
Exactly. And then whether I go with Foden or Kirkez, you know what I'm like. I'm probably going to. I think there's a good chance I'll probably go with Foden. I've got a bit of money in Kirkez, so I'm not pressing the go button on that quite yet. But that's probably the last decision I make. But this week, 4-3-3 in that. I don't really see. You're kind of right on Sarr versus Eze earlier on. I don't really see much point in going with Eze over Sarr, but I might be wrong on that. If Eze had penalties still, that I'd be much more interested in that. But yeah, you guessed my team. I suspect your team's going to look really, really similar, and I think we're going to have to try to eke out advantages as it goes, and treat this as kind of a bit like game week 1 again in some ways. And it's kind of the decisions from here. Get a bit of a boost this week and go from there. Really, it's just whether I go with Foden or go with the Kirkez option, which means that I keep Saka on the bench. But that's the only question I've got, really. But it kind of does itself, which is not particularly
not fun, is it? It's not fun.
No. But sometimes in FPL it's like this, honestly, and you've got to roll with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just hoping that enough people won't be doing it that it is still going to be a good rank gain. And I think differences will come into the squads around game week 32, 33 again when the doubles hit, because Villa will come onto the radar, and there are many different angles you can take on Villa. That could be in defense. It could be Rodgers, Asensio, Rashford, Watkins. There's loads of different options there. So I think that's where the differences might start creeping in. Then the free hit, of course, and then the back four of the season, 35 through to 38, is kind of like a free swing almost, where you make transfers as you feel it, and it's much more gut based. So yeah, it might look very samey now, but I think differences will start to come back in. But yeah, I just blame Erling Haaland for getting injured, because I think if he wasn't injured, all of these wildcards would look quite varied based on whether you've got Haaland in the team or not. And I think some people might even go without a Salah, for instance, if Haaland was in the team. So I think because we're down to probably a 1 million with just Salah, it makes it quite template, because there's so much money you can basically pick the 15 you want.
Yeah, agreed. Well, all right, there we go. on that sour note, we should end. We'll be back very, very soon, though.
We will, yeah, of course. Thank you all so much for listening, as always. Hopefully, even if you're not on a wildcard, you found this enjoyable. I certainly enjoyed this one. It was good to make sense of it all with you, Tom. In the meantime, we have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA, or myself at FPL Pricey, WGTA_FPL or FPL Pricey on X, Twitter, and Instagram or Threads is WGTA.FPL, and again, FPL Pricey on there for me. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could give us a follow on those social channels, that would be greatly appreciated. But also, if you could give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, or leave a like and hit subscribe on YouTube. I think we're very close to 2,000 subscribers on YouTube now, so that would be nice to reach before the end of the season. Thank you all in advance for doing so.
Yes, lovely stuff. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you think about FPL again after a bit of a lull. What a jolt back to reality this was, honestly. Back next Wednesday for what I initially wrote was a wildcard special. I feel like we've already done that. So I don't know what we're going to talk about, but probably a post-wildcard commiseration about not sticking with our guns after Bruno goes off, scores a hat-trick, and we all look very silly. The game won't be totally over when we come back on Wednesday, but I think that's the best free day for both of us. We don't have anyone on Chelsea Spurs, so selfishly, that's where we're going to go and be blissfully unaware of Cole Palmer destroying our ranks. So yeah, see you on Wednesday, and good luck if you are wildcarding. Yeah, hopefully we've helped you. It's very, very straightforward, I think. Goodbye.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?